you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. I need this message to go to the optics world, and I need your help to do that. Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Optics Room. I'm actually quite excited today. We have our first international guest from across the pond, Dr. Bethany Fishbein from the Power Practice. Bethany, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for the invitation and the connection. I'm excited to be your first international guest.
Definitely exciting, and I'm sure there's lots to share between us, similarities, differences, and there's so much more that we can learn from how you guys do things down there as well. But first, tell me a little bit about yourself and the Power Practice.
I am an optometrist since 1997. I know that makes me seem old here. I feel it.
No.
And I have two practices in New Jersey on the East Coast of the United States. And I'm also CEO of the Power Practice, which is a consulting group that helps practice owners internationally, mostly in the US and Canada, to achieve success in their business, whether that means financial success, better ownership of their time, or just additional clarity around their business. We work with doctors to help them reach their dreams.
So you must come across a lot of problems day to day and have a really good model to enable them to sort their issues out and move forward, I guess.
Absolutely. It's interesting. We work with practice owners at all stages of practice life, from first opening their doors to growing a business to getting ready to retire or sell their practice. And so many of the challenges are consistent between practice owners at all levels and probably consistent with practice owners across the pond as well.
Yeah, probably. What stage do you think is the most difficult?
Um, I think opening a practice is difficult. We certainly have a number of clients who've just, it's called a cold start. They open from nothing. And it's tough because it's every day and every patient matter so much. What's going to happen with this person? Somebody doesn't keep an appointment, doesn't come in, and it feels like it throws off your plans for the entire week, the entire month. At the same time, somebody comes in with a very good family. Each family member needs multiple pairs of glasses, and you're on top of the world. So I think that's difficult because the highs are so high and the lows are so low. They're absolutely on the roller coaster.
I think that's optometry in a nutshell. Everything you've just said can be just written into a book because it's the same over here as well. Um, you have one bad day, one bad morning, in fact, and you're like, that's it. Like, I've lost it for the week, I've lost it for the month. And then suddenly you get just a walk in come in and it just changes your whole day. So it shows us that there's never really ups and downs. Hopefully, we can keep it consistent throughout the week. But what I really want to get at is what can we learn from the US doing optometry? You guys do a lot of stuff that we are now just starting to do. For example, adding more clinical practice into our routine. Practices offering myopia management, dry eye management is increasing now more than ever. And no one was really thinking about it in the past. Whether there's a need for it now, post pandemic, or whether there's just too much competition around and people just want to stand out a little bit more. So they're trying to get at every little thing out there that's available. But you guys have been doing that for so long and it's built into your industry. I guess partly because your degree already includes that part, whereas ours is a little bit different. But it's so ingrained in your profession over there that you've made it so successful. How have you done that? And what's the key driver?
I think it's absolutely ingrained in our clinical education and practice, to the point that a lot of students go into optometry because they're interested specifically in the treatment of disease or the ability to manage myopia, to treat dry eye, aggressively treat dry eyes with lasers and procedures. And so it's very much a part of the mindset of a US optometrist. new practice owners sometimes will choose to have a piece of dry eye treatment equipment instead of something related to refractive practice. That's what they're excited about, and that's what they're thinking about. So it absolutely is very much part of what we do day to day.
How how can you encourage optometrist practice owners over here in the UK to take that on board? Because I'll tell you the way we see it over here. More clinical services means more chair time. More chair time means less people coming in. Less people coming in equals less revenue, equals more of your debt that you need to pay, and the less money you're making. How can we balance that with a commercial aspect of optometry?
I think finding the right balance is key. And one of the things we find on the US side is that some people have gone so far in the other direction that they're not thinking about those things that you just said, and they're not thinking about opportunities to make or miss an eyeglass sale and things like that. So I think one of the things that practice owners here have done is really work to find ways to provide those services without increasing the draw on optometrist time. One of the biggest differences I noticed when I started to observe optometrists in the UK is that you guys don't use technicians. Here, optometrists are using technicians. We have staff doing a lot of the testing that in your clinics the optometrist is doing themselves. And I'm not totally sure if that's a habit or a licensing issue, but if an optometrist has to be the one to stand there while a patient completes a visual field test so that you can monitor and treat their glaucoma, you're absolutely correct that is tough to defend that 10 minutes, 15 minutes as a productive use of their time when they could be seeing the next patient,
Yeah.
turning another patient over to optical.
So actually, optometrists over here, the visual fields is done by the optical assistant on the practice floor. The pre-test is done by the optical assistant as well as the pressures as well. So what the optometrist would do is history and symptoms, effectively, the refraction, and the health check. The health check is more of a screening. We're not qualified enough to treat that problem. However, there are courses such as independent prescribing that can allow optometrists to treat that on the high street if they haven't the necessary qualification to do so. So, what other tests do the optometrists not do and the technician does in the US?
It varies practice to practice, but there are a lot of practices where an assistant or a technician will do that patient history. They'll check their visual acuities. They'll take care of pupils, checking muscles, any of the instrument testing, photos, fields, OCTs, autorefract, things like that. There are even technicians in the US that refract. So now the role of the optometrist goes from being a data collector to a data analyzer, where they're coming in, pulling up images on the screen that have been taken by someone else, or maybe someone else even pulled those images up for them. And now they're looking at them with an eye on treatment or management of whatever it is they're seeing.
Now I know what you mean by making the use of their time. Because yes, you're right. We do a lot of those over here ourselves. It takes up three-quarters of the eye test, and then at the end, then we analyze all our results. Whereas I guess if a technician was to do all that, then you spend less time doing the test, more time just analyzing, and spending time actually treating the patient,
Right. And
which is
it's
a much
that
better way.
that's that patient treatment time that's important because I think we see practice owners that are spending a certain amount of time with a patient and they're looking to grow their practices. They're looking to become more efficient and they're afraid that if they start to delegate or involve someone else in that care, the patient is going to notice they didn't spend as much time with me. The optometrist used to spend a half hour with me and now they're only spending 10 minutes. But what actually happens is that the time the optometrist is spending is fully focused on communication, discussion, understanding, empathizing, explaining, making sure that any questions are answered instead of on data collection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a much better use of time. Um, I still feel practice owners here would be apprehensive. Number one, because of the regulations. The GOC is very strict in how this is done. So currently, there is no way someone who's not qualified will be able to do those tests. And I don't see that happening in the next 1 or 2 years either. However, I do see artificial intelligence and technology doing a lot of the tests that we do at the moment. And come 5, 10 years down the line, I don't think the optometrist, what it is today, is what it's going to be in the future. I think we are moving towards a world where it's more of a health check, more actually caring for the patient. And COVID actually just outlined how important that is, because during COVID, the hospitals were barely seeing anyone. And the ophthalmologists were happy for the optometrist to see that person and treat them as we thought best. And they're always on the phone if we ever do need any necessary guidance or help. And that's actually helped upskill a lot of optometrists. It's helped ophthalmologists become more confident in optometrists, because that's a key part of some services being allowed in certain areas or not. So there's a lot of shared care schemes within certain areas where the optometrist can treat someone. For example, they can in not treat, but maybe identify certain aspects of glaucoma. And if they feel that they need treatment, then they can be referred to a glaucoma specialist. I still feel it's quite a few steps behind the US. You guys are way ahead in that respect. And we are catching up. And I hope we do catch up quite quickly, because then it might make patient care across the world so much more easier. But I feel that technology and artificial intelligence is going to have more of an impact quickly. Do you see that happening in the US as well?
I do. And it's actually something that I speak about with doctors and have a lecture on as well, is just the understanding of what the role for that technology could be. Because I think, like any new technology, a lot of people tend to be afraid of it. Well, if artificial intelligence can do this, will I still have a job? Wait a minute, that's what I do. I just took a course. I've been trained to do this. How can artificial intelligence do it so well? But artificial intelligence is really doing some of what I was saying that we rely on staff members here to do. It's gathering the data, maybe taking that next step, putting it into an algorithm, doing some analysis to say, based on all of the information that's been entered, based on this patient's age, race, their family history, any other associated health conditions, the appearance of their optic nerve on an OCT, their visual field result, their intraocular pressure, the likelihood of them having glaucoma that needs to be treated is 98%. And even being able to take it one step further, the recommended treatment would be. So in that sense, it's enhancing the clinical decision making, because it's saying, if I incorporate all of the opinions of experts, here's what the recommendation would be. Then it's up to the provider treating that patient to decide, do I agree with this or not? Ultimately, the provider still gets the final decision, but that decision making is much more efficient than, let me think about their age. Let me think about their race. Let me think about this and this and this. And then if you think about the provider having a fixed amount of time, which they don't, it's not any, they're not getting pulled away by a giant hook after 10 minutes. But if you want to run a clinic and keep profitability in mind, you only have so much time. That time is in truly being an empathetic healthcare provider, somebody who's going to guide the patient through treatment in a way that the patient is going to accept and they're going to do what they're supposed to do, whether that's drops for glaucoma, whether it's orthokeratology for myopia, whether it's progressive lenses and computer glasses. Either way, the ultimate goal for both the practice and the patient is that the patient follows the recommendations that they've been given. And so the time spent in the human element is really devoted to that process.
Yeah, I feel that there's a big insecurity from optometrists. Everyone's very, very scared, and rightly so, that their jobs are going to be replaced. They've spent 10 years in the field, they spent so much money at university, and now they're going to be doing something completely different. And everything they learn, they're never going to do again. But I think it's important that we do move with the times. And I find that independent practice owners in the UK really struggle with that. Some of them are so set in their ways, they find it very difficult to change and adapt to the environment and adapt to their competitors down the road, because you can't go down any street without seeing at least two or three optometrists. They're everywhere. And I feel that if they don't, they'll go out of business. And so that's crucial and it's key. In the US, what is the model focused on? So in the UK, volume is a very important key component of running a successful business. Is it the same in the US, or do you double down and focus more on the clinical aspect of the care of the patient?
There are enough practices here that you can find practices succeeding either way. So there are some here that still are very volume focused. They're volume focused, and then the difference becomes that they can then provide total care in office rather than having to refer a patient out. So it might be focused on how many routine refractive eye exams can we get. However, when those exams reveal that something else needs to be done or looked at, we can take care of that too. And it's a very successful model, a very profitable model. But there are also other practices that really have gone all the way into how specific or how high level of care can we provide to each individual patient. And so you can have a practice seeing 100 patients, making $400 revenue per exam. That's a metric that we use. Or you can see a practice doing 40 patients with $1,000 revenue per exam with lower need for staff costs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think both are models of profitability, but I think where a lot of optometrists here get into trouble is that they go into their day or their month or their year really not knowing which of those they want to be. And that's where they run into business management problems. Because if you're working on volume and then you stop short because now you're going to give essentially 2 exam spots to someone who needs a visual field and their eye pressure check, all of a sudden, this is maybe adding to clinical care for your patients, but is detracting from profitability of the business. And when optometrists haven't thought through that process and understand where they want those things to fit in, they can end up financially shooting themselves in the foot a little bit by being focused in a different direction without a model to do so in a profitable way.
So I guess it's about making a decision and sticking to it rather than fluctuating between the two.
The decision piece is important. It's not even fluctuating between two that's the problem. It's not having one at all.
Okay.
So it's okay to say, I'm here for the volume, but all of a sudden there's this thing, and I'm going to make a decision to do this particular patient differently. But it's when they're influenced by whatever is going on at the moment. We talked about the testing that the technicians are doing. So just as an example, any new piece of equipment, any new testing diagnostic device, the recommendations from the company selling it is always that you should do it on every patient, because if you do it on every patient, you're going to find patients to treat. you bring something in, you start doing that. You bring something else in, you start doing that. You bring something else in. And all of a sudden, the testing sequence is 35, 40 minutes. The patient is mentally done before they
Yeah.
even get to see the optometrist. Now the optometrist does their thing, and they're talking about dry eye, or they're talking about something different. The patient very patiently listens and nods and says, okay. And then at the end, the patient is walking out and they say something like, so do I need to go somewhere else for my glasses? Or should I have said something about wanting contact lenses? And so it can be a distraction if it's not done in an organized way.
Great. So what advice would you give to a practice owner here in the UK who's thinking about adding clinical services to their practice, but is worried about the chair time it's going to take? And not just that, but also the amount they're going to have to invest in the optometrist to actually upskill themselves.
So I think the first step is to really understand, as a clinic, whoever the leadership in that clinic is, the why behind that decision. Why are you making that decision? Why do you want to do this? It's very different if we want to do this because the closest ophthalmologist has a 6.5-month waiting period and we want to give our community access to care, versus we're trying to build an additional profit center, versus, well, I hear this is what all the cool kids are doing. I don't want, I want to keep up with the times. Those are very different. So I think leadership wide, they need to understand why. And then the second is, I think that anything we do in private practices has to at least be a financial consideration. It doesn't have to be a fully financially motivated decision. If an optometrist is motivated to upskill and they're super interested, and that's going to keep a great optometrist happy in a great practice, that's a reason. But you can't ignore the financials of it. So when you start to bring this in, you bring in new technology with a plan. You understand the financial aspect of outlaying money for any additional training, as well as for any additional equipment. And then you have to be able to make your best projection of how many patients are going to be taking advantage of this technology. And then what's the financial impact that that's going to have on the practice? And can we be really intentional about the schedule to make that happen in a way that adds to the practice financially instead of takes away from it?
Yeah.
So can testing be done and interpretation later? Can the schedule be blocked so that Thursday mornings are for glaucoma management, because that's a traditionally less busy time in the practice? Very intentional decision making to go into this in a way that works.
There's lots to think about, isn't it? So it's not just plain and simple. So with the rise of offering these services, myopia, dry eyes, everyone's getting very excited about it here in the UK. There's so many more courses available, so many more practices offering it, and it's amazing. What mindset shift is needed from optometrists to then provide these services? Because it's one thing implementing it in your practice, it's another thing your optometrist actually carrying it out. And from an optometrist who might not be used to that, they might just be used to refracting, health check, recommending. How can they shift their mindset to this new way of working?
I think they have to go back to that why. And there are reasons that they became an optometrist that will be the same very compelling reasons to provide these treatments. So if you became an optometrist because you understand the importance of vision, you have poor vision yourself, and you know the difference that clear vision makes for people, then these things, whether it's myopia, glaucoma, dry eye, are all technologies that allow you to further your own personal mission even more, right? So I think especially if the optometrist is not the one who's making the decision to bring in the technology, you have to find a way to connect what the optometrist wants and why they practice optometry in general to the new technology so that they understand how it fits in instead of takes away from. And then I think in the clinic with the patient, the mindset has to be, what else can I do to help? Because if you're doing mostly the same thing, you're doing refractive exams, prescribing glasses, prescribing contacts, and you've done that over and over and over for years, and anything else you're used to sending the patient out to another provider, that feels normal.
Yeah.
We want them to know what happens when that patient goes to the other provider, because an optometrist who says, well, I'm much nicer than they are. I don't make patients wait. I have an appointment available tomorrow. I'm really kind. I care the most. What does that optometrist do better than the person that they were referring to? In the beginning, it's not the clinical, because somebody else out there might have lots more clinical experience, but maybe it's because this is my first case or my second case, I am so invested in making sure this patient succeeds that nobody else is going to have that level of investment. So they need to get to a place where they understand why they are the best place for this patient to be. I already know them. I understand them. I know their history. I care about them as a person. We have a relationship for many years, whatever it is. And then go for it.
Great. I think there's so much to learn. And I think viewers, I think you'll need to listen to this episode again in order to actually get all the information, because there's so much to learn from what you guys are doing down there. And I'm sure that we can put it into practice ourselves. So, Bethany, thank you so much for part one. Viewers, there will be a part two because there's so much to talk about. I'm going to put the link to part two in the description below as well. Bethany, see you very soon.
All right. Thank you so much. I will see you very soon.